There was a boy before there was a fire. That is the detail that gets lost in every account of Brand, in the legends that describe a being of pure combustion, in the warnings that circulate among mages who have studied what happens when raw magical force consumes a human soul. The fire is what everyone talks about. The boy is what explains it. His name was Kegan Rodhe. He was born in Freljord as a man already blamed for something he had not done, in a community that had decided what he was before he understood the question. What was done to him there, slowly, consistently, with the particular cruelty of people who feel justified, built something inside him that the fire did not create. It only released. The fire was not the beginning, it was the conclusion. New here? Subscribe. Every week, a League of Legends story, told the way it deserves to be heard. His mother was a healer, not powerful. Her gift was small and particular, the kind of low-level magical attunement that expressed itself in practical knowledge of plants and remedies and the Ryze, specific quality of attention that made her effective with the sick and the wounded. She lived on the edge of a coastal settlement called Rygan's Reach because living on the edge was the only arrangement the settlement would permit. The reason was Kegan's father, a raider from outside their community, someone who had come and gone without staying and without asking for anything except what he had taken. The settlement processed this information into a category it was comfortable with, the outsider's fault, the outsider's child, the living evidence of something that had happened that they preferred not to think about directly. They thought about it indirectly, in the form of Kegan. Every time they saw him, they called him what they called him piled. He heard it young enough that the hearing became the aburha baseline from which he understood himself. His mother kept him alive and kept herself alive through the practice of the healing that the Mahada community needed and would not offer genuine welcome in exchange for. She healed them. They tolerated her. They did not come to her door socially. They did not include her son among buffers socially. Their children's associations, they maintained with the specific consistency of a community that Chamata has made a collective decision about a person, the boundary they had drawn around the woman, who had been involved in something inconvenient. Kegan understood all of this before he had language for it. He understood it the way children understand things, not as analysis but as sensation, as the lived experience of being on the outside of something warm while the cold came from all directions. He had almost no friends. He had violence, the specific kind that builds up in a person who has no other available outlet for the pressure of existing in a state of perpetual rejection, and he released it in the ways that available to someone young and powerless and furious. He burned the anger outward. It was the only direction available. Here is what the accounts of Brand rarely pause to consider. The woman who healed a community that would not return the basic decency of including her son in theirs. Who spent her years, limited years it turned out. Freljord's winters are specific about what they take from bodies that are already depleted, giving what she could to people who decided that what she could give was owed to them, and what she needed in return was optional. The winters wore her down the way Freljord winters wear everything down that is not rebuilt, and Winvadided. Reinforced, she was not being rebuilt. She was giving away her energy and receiving too little back. The seasons accumulated into a weight that her body eventually ran out of reserves to carry. Kegan scattered her ashes on the hills and thought about the people she had spent her life healing. None of them had come. Not one. He understood what this meant. He understood it not as an abstraction but as the final piece of a Tiabo picture that had been forming since his earliest memory. He was not part of this community. He Tiabo Mav this community. He Abo Mamaris had never been part of it. His mother had given them her life's work and they had taken it with the easy entitlement of people who have decided they are owed a thing and have never been required to examine why they believe that. He was going to let them experience what it felt like to have something taken. He burned the village. He disappeared into the dark before dawn, carrying wounds from whatever resistance had been offered. The wounds left marks. The marks did not fade. He moved into the Freljord tundra with no plan beyond forward, which is the only direction available to someone who has just destroyed the only place they ever lived and cannot go back. He told himself he was looking for his father. He was not, exactly. He was looking for something closer to the opposite of everything the village had been, not revenge, which was behind him now, but whatever existed on the other side of being known only as what someone else had done. Someone who would look at him and see him as a person rather than a category. The tundra offered him nothing of the kind. It offered exposure, and then exhaustion, and then the specific narrowing of options that extreme cold produces in a body that is stopped, generating enough warmth to stay ahead of the temperature. He found a cave. He stopped moving. He began the process of not getting up again. Something else found the cave first. Ryze was not passing through on his way to somewhere else. He was always on his way to somewhere. The nature of his mission ensured it. The continuous movement from one location to the next, in the endless work of finding the world runes before anything worse did. But the low, specific route that put him in proximity to a frozen cave containing a young man who was days from death was not accidental in any cosmically meaningful sense. It was the particular accident of two people occupying the same cold geography at the same cold moment. He saw what was in the cave. He saw more than the frozen body. The thing that experienced mages see when they look at a person who has significant untrained magical potential, which is less a visual fact and more a quality of presence, a sense of something banked and uncontrolled, and extremely dangerous in the absence of guidance. He brought him back. He took him on as an apprentice. He began the slow work of teaching. Someone who had every reason not to trust anyone. That trust was the prerequisite for learning, and that learning was the prerequisite for not eventually destroying himself and a significant radius around him. Kegan was a difficult student, not because he lacked the capacity. He had more raw talent than most people Ryze had encountered, which was simultaneously promising and alarming. Because the qualities that Ryze needed from an apprentice, patience, humility, the willingness to receive instruction rather than simply acting on instinct, were the qualities that Kegan's entire life had been organized against developing. He had survived by acting fast and keeping moving, and trusting nothing that required him to be still and vulnerable. Being still and vulnerable was Balig Raim, what learning required. Ryze asked for it. Kegan gave it imperfectly and intermittently. Between these two states, something that resembled progress was being made. It was not enough time. This is where the story fractures, where the before and after separate into things that cannot be reconciled into a single continuous narrative, because what happened in between was not a certain continuation. It was a replacement. They found a fragment of a world rune. Ryze had been searching for these for longer than most people were alive. He knew what they twain did. He knew the specific, absolute nature of the danger. Not abstract danger, not theoretical danger, but the documented historical catastrophe that world runes produced in human hands. Without exception. He had held them. He had resisted them. He knew what resisting them to force required and how much it took from him, even with decades of preparation and will bimitus cocytus specifically hardened for this purpose. Kegan had none of that preparation. He had something else, the hunger of someone who had spent his entire life being told he was nothing, encountering a power that told him he could be everything. The rune's pull was not metaphorical. It was immediate and total and spoke directly to the parts in person that the ordinary world had been systematically refusing to address. It said, "You are significant." It said, "The small cold village and the people in it and the whole structure of your life up to this moment were wrong about what you are." It said this in a language that was not words, in a way that bypassed the rational apparatus, and reached something more fundamental. Ryze warned him. Kegan heard the warning as something that existed in a different register from what the rune was offering. He made the choice that the rune had been designed, if designed, is the right word for something that old, to produce. The raw magic did not absorb him gradually. It consumed him in the way that fire consumes. All at once, total, leaving nothing of the original structure except the heat that had been released by its destruction. The soul that had been Kegan Rodhe was not transformed by what happened. It was used up. What the fire needed, it took. What remained after that taking was organized around different principles. Ryze watched what had been his student become something that wore his student's shape. But Prubif was not his student. He barely escaped what followed. Brand has existed since that moment as fire exists, consuming, moving, taking what it needs, without accounting for what it leaves behind. He rises sometimes into the sky like a burning comet, visible from distances that suggest something astronomical rather than terrestrial. He sinks sometimes into the frozen ground of Freljord and sleeps with the patience of something that does not experience time as loss, waiting for the specific signature of a world rune, which he can detect the way fire detects fuel, with the specific sensitivity of a thing that has learned to F and what feeds it. The boy who burned a village in Freljord is gone. What remains understands nothing of grief or Sunam. Justice or the particular human mathematics of deserving and receiving. It understands only the boy. Next rune, the next expansion, the next moment of consuming something that had been meant to cup. Standing in the way. If another world rune falls within reach, there are very few things in Runeterra positioned to Ouija game. Intervene. Ryze knows this better than anyone. He has spent the centuries since that cave trying to ensure the interval between Brand and the next rune remains long enough for the rest of the world to survive it. He has not always succeeded. He has not yet failed completely. The fire is still burning. It is patient in the way that fire is patient. Not calm, not still, but certain. Certain that the fuel exists. Certain it will be found. Certain it will not be what stops it. If this story reached you, subscribe. Every week, the full lore of a League of Legends champion, told the way it deserves to be heard.